the raging anti-Semitism on college campuses has become something more than disconcerting. It is obscene. It is sickening. It is something that I never thought I would see in America as a Jew. But many non-Jews have said the same thing. What's happening? Why is this happening? What are these campus protests really about? And there is a palpable dread felt by myself and so many Jewish people since the pogrom of October 7th and all that has followed it. The cheering of intifada on college campuses, the blocking of Jewish students, the invitation of pro-Hamas speakers and the like, all of it has been painful, but hopefully a situation that can be engaged, tangled with, and hopefully defeated for the better interest, not just for Jews, but for humanity. So my guest today has been at the forefront of this and has been, I think, a robust voice and an important one against the radical left on college campuses and what they have come to stand for. That is Shabbos Kestenbaum joining me here on Dirty Moderate. Shabbos, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and thank you for having me.
So as you know, and listeners don't know this, I found Shabbos because his videos have gone viral, which I'm so happy about. And I said, I got to get you on. So let's go back to the beginning. I mean, you've got so much going on apart from the fact that you're a graduate student at Harvard and you're suing Harvard and you've become a ubiquitous presence, on various news channels. Let's talk about you. Where are you from? Who are you? How did you get to obviously you got to this place because out of necessity, but let's trace the early trajectory on into Divinity School at Harvard.
Sure. So I'm from a proudly religious Orthodox Jewish family. I'm also a first generation American. My parents are both immigrants. My dad was born in Japan. My mom was born in London. They met in Israel and then moved to the US really to chase the American dream about 30 years ago. I was raised to view my identity both as a proud American and as a proud Jew. I never saw those two as contradictory. On the contrary, I saw them very much as complementary. I was always very proud to be an American and proud to be Jewish. I'm one of 7 siblings, which for my Orthodox community is actually pretty standard. It's not too out of the ordinary. And I had done what was pretty standard in my community. So after high school, I went to yeshiva in Israel for 2 years. I lived in the old city of Jerusalem, literally 30 seconds away from the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Western Wall, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So epicenter of the 3 Abrahamic faiths, and certainly politically a point of contention. It dawned on me after yeshiva that as much as I grew up in a religious setting, I wanted to explore theology from a secular, non-religious, academic, pluralistic environment. And so I applied to Harvard, didn't think much of it. And lo and behold, I found out I got in. I actually found out I got in while I was in Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is an interesting story maybe for another time. But flash forward, I guess, 2 years now. And I've been having a very different type of learning experience. I always call myself an unwitting advocate because I did not intend to do this. I don't want to do this. It's nice going in front of a TV. It's nice going in front of Congress. It's nice speaking with you, but I shouldn't be here. You know, I should be doing my research and my studies and my learning and all the things that attracted me to Harvard and not trying to vouch for my right to be here.
Right. So are you a doctoral student at Harvard? Is that what it is? Is that master's student? Okay. And you arrived at Harvard 2 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And obviously you talk in your article, which we'll talk about, or the Newsweek article I got about you suing Harvard, about sort of how you came to this. But you arrived at the Harvard campus 2 years ago. Now, given that you were, going to study Judaism and religion in a secular way, a little more pluralistic way, and you didn't want to be here doing this, how soon from the time you arrived at Harvard did you find yourself confronting what were some maybe ominous signs of this? Or was it sort of dormant and quiet, although it's not really been for the last decade, but was it, because we haven't had quite as much activity over there? Has that been the, yeah.
That's a good question. I actually began confronting this almost immediately. I actually wrote an article for H.com in October of 2022 about anti-Semitism at Harvard. And I'll give you just one quick anecdote that I think explains this really well. Rightly or wrongly, Harvard routinely disciplines, restricts, and regulates speech. It disinvites speakers. It rescinds the acceptances of students. It goes out of its way to have mandatory Title IX training where it teaches students the dangers of fat phobia, of cis hetero sexism, all sorts of laundry lists of microaggressions. Yet there was no mandatory Title IX training pertaining to anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. So it made it very odd that in my first month of being a student here, the Harvard-Palestine Solidarity Committee decided to invite, for the second time, a man by the name of Mohammed El-Kurd. Mohammed El-Kurd, for those who don't know, frequently appears on the Anti-Defamation League's top 10 anti-Semites. This is someone who believes that Jews eat the organs of Palestinians, believes that the Israeli occupying forces have internalized the ways of Nazi Germany. And for those on Twitter, he lamented about a month ago that Palestinians can't hijack planes anymore. So it was a bit odd that here is someone who is a vehement anti-Semite, but is being graced and having an honor to speak at Harvard. So we went to the president, we went to the DEI and the administrators, and we told them our complaints. Harvard has a track record of going out of its way to protect minority groups against speech that it finds harmful, again, rightly or wrongly, but nevertheless, this is what you do. So you should simply apply that standard as it pertains to this obvious anti-Semite. And the response we got was, look, what do you want us to do? He has a First Amendment right. And to me, that was shocking because that's a clear double standard. I mean, you could not get a more explicit example of applying a different set of principles and rules on a different minority group. And as I said, this is my first month being at Harvard. So there was always this genteel, quiet anti-Semitism. Most Jews, especially those involved at the Hillel or the Chabad, were and are aware of it. Mm-hmm. But certainly it wasn't as inescapable as it is today.
Right. I mean, and historically, I went to Brown, the Ivy League, which, of course, it's changed radically, but of course, famously had quotas that excluded Jews from admission for a long time. But also, there was always it was the old waspy, you might say, Goyish anti-Semitism that kind of lurked below the surface. Different era, very different era. Now it's really a multicultural, multi-ethnic, left-wing based anti-Semitism, largely from non-white people who see Jews as white and therefore problematic, and I know that feeds into it. But what's so fascinating about this whole First Amendment thing, and by the way, to your point, and I've spoken about this on my show, ad nauseum, this is about free speech and double standards. It's not about free speech, right? To your point that all Jewish students have been facing the reality of, I think, the hypocrisy of DEI and the way Title IX has been applied and the use of speech that certain groups get to engage in and others don't. But first of all, the First Amendment protects you from the government censoring your speech, okay? So people, again, like back to the Establishment Clause, people just never get this as a primer. It is not a place where a corporation, a private one like Harvard, though they do receive federal funds, has to be bound by a First Amendment right. So that obviously is bullshit, and obviously one that they haven't applied. As we've seen with the encampments, which of course you've been facing and speaking out against, you don't have a First Amendment right to block traffic or gate something in or pollute somewhere or destroy it. You just don't in any act of protest. That goes to any protest, Black Lives Matter, the Vietnam War, any of that stuff. So it's a very interesting phenomenon that I see that seems to be specifically designed to put Jews in a separate category, right? It's a completely new kind of anti-Semitism. And you're there in 2022, and is it from that point that you were addressing this vile speaker that until now or until October 7th that you started worrying about your existential again? Was it then like, oh my God, now we're in trouble? Because did you sue in the fall of this past year? Is that when the suit?
Of 2020, January of this past January.
January, I didn't remember. It was the end of 2023. Right, okay.
Yeah, so had it not been for October 7th, I'll put it this way. Post-October 7th, we had a much stronger case because at that point, as I mentioned earlier, the anti-Semitism was just simply inescapable. Whereas pre-October 7th, there was a lot of denial. There was a lot of sweeping things under the rug. There have been multiple instances of swastikas being drawn on campus, but it never really got media attention, and people never really made a big deal about it. Harvard did a pretty good job of covering it up. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just meant that no one spoke about it. So when I give talks, I often begin my speech by saying that whatever you've been reading in the media or hearing from friends, I could probably guarantee you that it's actually worse than what you think it is. Why? Because number one, we as Jewish students at Harvard are very self-selective as to what we give the media for stories, because there's some things that they just won't publish. And we know that. So when the New York Post about a month ago had on their front cover a picture of the American flag being replaced by the Palestinian flag with the tagline, "Harvard has fallen," that's because we as Jewish students were able to get a picture of it and were able to send it. But there are some things that we either just couldn't document or we know media is not interested. So for example, when I planted 1,200 Israeli and American flags about 3 weeks ago on Harvard Divinity School, and within 24 hours, it was vandalized 3 separate times. That all occurred on the Sabbath. I'm a religious Jew, so I can't use my phone on the Sabbath. I couldn't really record it. So that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means that you're not really going to have major national exposure due to that. So look, the bottom line is anti-Semitism was always there. Just now, it's inescapable. And I'll just say one last point. Claudine Gay, the former president of Harvard, was terrible. I mean, in so many regards, she just failed every single time.
I wrote a piece about her. Yeah.
Oh, so, good.
Yeah.
There was one good thing she did, although albeit unintentionally. When she testified on December 5th in front of Congress on live TV under oath, she said that the calls for genocide against Jewish people could be okay depending on the context. And why was that such a brilliant thing to say? Because it finally validated what Jewish students had been saying for months, namely that we are treated categorically different. And here we have the president of the university admitting to it, saying that, yeah, you actually can call for genocide against Jewish students. And we were watching that and we said, we told you, now will you believe us? So just after October 7th, it just became an undeniable reality.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to dive into the piece you wrote in Newsweek about the case, about your lawsuit, because I think what you write is everybody should be reading this. It was published March 5th of this year. You write, I was horrified at how normalized and accepted anti-Semitism is among my colleagues. There is also no safe space for Jews to grieve at Harvard. When I put posters up of Jewish children who have been taken hostage by Hamas on a Harvard Divinity bulletin board, where students are encouraged to post about victims of violence, every single time, without exception, they were ripped down. I tried working with Harvard on the problem. I repeatedly expressed my concerns to administrators. I have to read the rest of this. I apologize because I have it here. But time and time again, as I allege in my lawsuit, evidence of uncontrolled discrimination and harassment fell on deaf ears. Okay, so can you go into the lawsuit more to the extent you can?
Yeah, sure. First of all, that anecdote is painfully normalized at this point. It doesn't really elicit outrage anymore when I say, "Oh, our hostage posters of Jewish babies got torn down," because of course they did.
As you know through this, because I do so many shows in it, and I know you feel the same way. Everything bears repeating, right? If we believe, as you and I do as Jews, as I said, even if I weren't a Jew, my God, my Christian friends, the biggest Zionists, never again, has to be. People have to understand that our concerns as Jews and yours as a specific experience, that's why you're here, should not be underplayed. Anyway.
No, that's absolutely true. Couldn't agree more. So look, I'll first start off by saying this. When I began meeting with my legal team, we were building a case together for a couple of months. And I basically said at every time we met, if Harvard were to change, if they were to implement policies to combat anti-Semitism, if they were to address the grievances of Jewish students, if they were to be serious about implementing reforms, then I'm not going to file the lawsuit because there would be no need. But time and time again, Harvard proved publicly that it was either unable or unwilling to not only take our concerns seriously, but to do anything about those concerns. So unfortunately, we had to take a relatively drastic step, and we filed the lawsuit mid-January. And not only did we file a lawsuit mid-January, but we actually filed an amended complaint because there was so much that happened after we filed. The encampments is probably the best example, or the fact that students drew our Jewish university president with a devil horn and a tail straight out of Nazi Germany-esque anti-Semitic tropes. So unfortunately, there's so much we still have to update as it pertains to our lawsuit. But the bottom line is we didn't want to do it. We don't want to put our names out there, especially I'm the only named plaintiff. It's scary and there's a lot of pressure, but I felt like I owed it to myself and to the many other Jewish students at Harvard who feel like they don't have or didn't have a voice. And that's why if Harvard does not want to be held accountable in the court of public opinion, we will make sure that they are held accountable in a court of law.
Yeah. So Shabbos, here's something to ponder. I'm almost 50, so born in 1974, and I grew up not only as a Jew, we were a member of a conservative temple, but we really were Reformed Jews. But, my education was steeped, not my Jewish education, just my secular education was steeped in Holocaust studies and an understanding of that. Of course, I grew up in a generation of parents who were born after World War II and grandparents who were born before World War I. So there's obviously a deep spiritual, political connection to Zionism in Israel. It wasn't anything that we ever contemplate as being up for debate. Of course, there were so many tries and attempts at a Palestinian state, and constant conversations about, oh my God, if we could just have a two-state solution. It feels quaint now, like the good old days when things really seemed possible. But there's been a breathtaking shift, right, among, I guess, Gen Z, certainly millennials, but Gen Z and beyond, the way young people view Israel. It's infected the base of the Democratic Party. It's reflected across actually the youth in almost every demographic. I think with the exception maybe of like evangelical Christians or something, but it's there, ethnic group, age, the age of the various ethnic groups in those generations are all included in there. Obviously you're religious, but that shouldn't matter because you're proud and you should be. Do you have any insight? And I know you're living through it and younger, so it's not like you can give me some historical perspective because in 1965 you were fighting the PLO or anything. But give us, because you're studying this stuff, and I write about it extensively. What's your take on this very scary? I don't even just say abandonment of Israel, but abandonment of Jews, I would say.
Yeah, and it definitely is scary. So there are two battles being fought. One is the battle on the front lines of Gaza, and that's, of course, fought with tanks and machinery and weapons, and I can't do much to help. But there's a second battle that's being fought that's far more insidious, and some would even say is just as important, if not more, and that's the battle of ideas. That's the battle for the sanctity of the Jewish homeland, for the rights of Jews to decolonize and to return to their ancestral homeland. And it is quite apparent, not just at Harvard and not just at the Ivy Leagues or in institutions of higher learning in the United States, but really across broad swaths of society, that the Western democratic narrative is losing, and it's losing quite bad. I would say, and yes, I can't draw on historical experiences or personal experiences, I should say. What I can't point to is anecdotal evidence of my couple of years being here at Harvard and my experience in the world of higher education. You and your listeners have probably heard this ad nauseum, but as you said, it bears worth repeating. And the stereotype is kind of true.
Yeah.
Harvard has diversity, equity, and inclusion mandates and offices across the university and across higher education. It is the norm. In order to receive tenure, it is almost mandatory in many cases to sign on to official DEI statements that you support efforts to include people based on racial or ethnic identity.
Which, by the way, as I tell my listeners, and again, I am moderate, but I as a student of history, that's like something out of the Soviet Union. I mean, people don't understand. I'm not like people laugh. Well, what do you mean? It's a diverse. I said that is outrageous that you have to. And I know Harvard's not alone. I just had to throw that out. Go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. And the particular problem as it pertains to Jewish people is DEI classifies all peoples into two distinct categories. You're the oppressor or you're the oppressed. And Jews, especially American Jews, have the misfortune of being characterized as white. Mm-hmm. And whether it was 40 babies beheaded on October 7th or 40,000 babies beheaded, it almost doesn't really matter because, as my classmates at Harvard will tell you, resistance is justified when people are occupied.
Yeah, you have it coming anyway. You deserve it.
Exactly. We had it coming anyways. And we, as the white settler colonialists, we do not have a stake. We do not have a claim on our ancestral homeland. And that ideology is so pervasive and it is so normalized that it makes sense that post-October 7th, you wouldn't have an outpour of support towards Jews or the outpour of support towards self-defense or Western democracy, but instead, using this binary ideological system, Jews are kind of white and Palestinians are kind of brown. And you look at your TV and you see a brown kid in a hospital, and our sympathies are almost instinctually connected to the oppressed, to the brown, to the Palestinians. And that doesn't mean to say that Palestinians don't deserve our sympathy. Of course they do. The differentiation is Israel is fighting an existential crisis against a terrorist regime. And that terrorist regime does not receive any significant outpour of condemnation on Ivy League universities or institutions of higher education. They genuinely believe, and I'm not going to, but I can tell you the names. I know these classmates, I know these professors who believe that Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis are legitimate political resistance organizations. That is very scary. And I don't have easy answers to how we can counter that narrative. Because even if we are successful in a court of law, even if we get Harvard to pay us punitive damages and install a federal monitor and implement their policies in a more equitable way, even if we were to receive all of that, that still would not address the heart of the issue, which is you have young people who are going into institutions and being taught that the best thing you can do for society is be a social justice activist and demand what you view as equality and liberation and fairness, when in actuality you are perpetrating the very systems that cause oppression and that cause discrimination.
I'm sure it falls on deaf ears, but like when you bring up this subject, it's not like it's a sidebar or a historical footnote like Mizrahi Jews. For example, I grew up in Miami, and some of my parents' best friends, my mom's white Jewish secular friend married an Iraqi Jew, and a Mizrahi Jewish family was ejected, as most Jews were, from Arab nations. This was actually post-World War II. You bring that up, and by the way, his name's Sammy. He is not white. I mean, anyone can call him white, but he is not white. And I don't think he would be offended either way, but you would never identify him as white, because we're in land now where identification is everything. It doesn't matter what it is. I identify as white, or identify as black, or whatever, or multiracial. Is that just get out of here, oppressor? Is it just a one fell swoop? I mean, at an Ivy League campus, and I went to an Ivy League school, will you expect there to be nuance? Is it selective nuance? Is it nothing? Is it, actually, when you bring that up, they're ignorant? Because there's so much historical ignorance. How do you address that?
I'll give you one quick example. And again, I'm not going to say names, but there was I know exactly who she is. A girl in my class, a woman in my class, I should say, who, when I brought this point up about the Farhud, of course, was the forced expulsion of about 800,000 to 1 million Jews, primarily from Iraq, but across the Middle East and North Africa. Right. And I brought this up.
Also known as colonialism, but okay.
Also known as colonialism. And I brought up that very point, talking about settler colonialism and the Nakba. And she told me in front of the class, in front of the professor with a straight face, that the Farhud was a Zionist plot to get Jews into mandatory Palestine in order to increase their numbers. And there was no pushback from the professor. And there was no pushback from the classmates. This was a Harvard University student genuinely believing and arguing publicly that the Farhud was a Zionist conspiracy to increase the immigration numbers to the eventual state of Israel. So part of it is ignorance, for sure. I can also tell you that shortly after October 7th, there was a student at Harvard who was involved in student government. She's in a leadership position. And to her credit, she reached out to me to say, I'm thinking of you and your family, and I'd love to connect. And so I spoke with her. I was actually in Israel at the time, so it was over Zoom. And I don't remember exactly how, but I mentioned that it was difficult because I have siblings in Israel, and very often they have to go into bomb shelters. And she said, what do you mean they have to go into bomb shelters? I said, well, there are rockets coming. And she said, rockets from where? I said, what do you mean? There are rockets coming from Gaza, and there are also rockets coming from the north, from Lebanon. And she said, I had no idea. As in, October 7th was an isolated event where certain Palestinians infiltrated Israeli territory, but that was it. And Israel has been retaliating ever since. There was no knowledge that actually, no, the war continues. Jews or Muslims or Christians, those in the state of Israel, are continuously being put in harm's way. She didn't know. And this is, again, to her credit, she reached out, and I applaud her for doing that. But this is someone who is in an elected position of leadership at Harvard, and she had no idea that rockets were being launched into Israel proper. So a lot of it is ignorance, but I can't give too much credit and be too sympathetic because a lot of it is malicious. And the best example for that is
the ignorance, to the extent that it is ignorance, is nefarious.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if there was a real willingness to learn, people would be willing to learn.
That's right. Sorry, I interrupted you. You said that you...
Yeah, so an example in terms of the malicious nature of it is it would be one thing to say a week after globalize the Intifada because, I didn't know that that's what the Intifada meant. And then once you learn what the Intifada was, which was, of course, two distinct periods, the first and second Intifada, of mass violence and random acts of terrorism against Jews in the state of Israel, things like hospitals being blown up, school buses being blown up. So if you didn't know that and you just thought Intifada was this Arabic word for uprising, that would be one thing. But we're now in May, and we Jewish students at Harvard have made a public and concentrated effort to educate, whether it is public signs in the center of Harvard Yard, whether it's op-eds in the Harvard Crimson, whether it's talking to our peers directly. We have made it very clear what the Intifada means to Jewish people. It means the violent destruction of the Jewish state, and it means violent acts against Jews. We made that point very clear. And in May, just yesterday, you've had a group of students and faculty chanting, Intifada, Intifada, come to America. Or over the encampments, people chanting, there is only one solution, there is only one solution, Intifada revolution. They have been talking about the Intifada for months now. So as much as I wanted to give credit to those two individuals for just simply being ignorant and not knowing, I cannot do the same for the hundreds of students and faculty members who continue to chant for an Intifada. And let me close with this last point.
Sure.
I have still heard today from students that, to you it means the violent destruction of Jews, but to us it really does mean this general sense of uprising. It is fascinating how Jewish people, one of the very few groups to have experienced a real genocide and persecution at every level in every locale, we are the only minority group that are not allowed to define what is hurtful, derogatory, and dangerous rhetoric. Right. All of a sudden, you might think that that's anti-Semitic, but I, as the non-Jew, don't, so I'm allowed to say it. That would never apply if I, God forbid, decided to call my African-American friends the N-word and justify it by saying, for me, it's a sense of camaraderie and friendship. That would never be an acceptable answer, but there's this double standard.
Yeah, I mean, imagine saying, or maybe even on a not benign level, but on a lesser level, saying, I know you say that you experience racism every day, but you don't. That's BS. It doesn't really exist. You've made it up, right? Because your African-American friends will tell you, actually, for whatever optimistic purpose, my African-American friends are deeply pro-Israel and are very offended by this and are, certainly it's anecdotal, but resent the idea of the grafting of American race relations on a terrorist entity. They're not Palestinian. They don't relate to this. They're not trying to be, Eldridge Cleaver or something in the Black Panther, some kind of global, leftist movement. And they think it's insane. Again, people are people. You never know. Today, by the way, the New York Times has a piece out, which is horrifying. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called On Campus, a New Social Litmus Test, Zionist or Not. Some Jews say they've been dropped by old roommates and sorority sisters and ostracized from campus clubs and teams because of their views, which are sometimes assumed. And I wanted to read this particular paragraph because I wanted to touch on something. They call this the litmus test. The article refers to this as the litmus test, as the subheading. Some Jewish students on campus believe these dynamics amount to a kind of litmus test. If you support Palestine, you're in. If you support the existence of or aren't ready to denounce Israel, you're out. And they say this is not limited to pro-Palestine protests. It is instead merely the most pointed form of a new social pressure that has started to drip down from the public square onto the fabric of everyday campus life, seeping into spaces that would seem to have little to do with these politics, clubs, sports, casual friendships, dance troupes. Rabbi Jason Rubinstein, the incoming executive director of Harvard Hillel, do you know this man?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Said, so I brought up said the more explicit litmus test of the protests were, quote, making visible and physical something that's happening in a lot of places. Now, I believe, okay, to unpack this whole subject, that to call somebody a Zionist now from young people on the left, in the main, I mean, of course, we have to broad stroke here, is the equivalent of calling somebody a dirty Jew. Do you agree with that?
I would say that's pretty accurate. I don't think in the 21st century it's fashionable to be openly anti-Semitic in the same way it's not fashionable to be openly racist. But there are terms you can use. So, for example, I remember distinctly, I'm a registered Democrat, and I did not support Joe Biden in the primaries. And I remember when he first ran in the primaries, one of the criticisms that he received was actually from the African-American community. Why? Because in the 90s, and this is true of Hillary Clinton as well, in the 90s, he spoke about the super predators, these young, oftentimes fatherless teens who patrol the streets of America, just committing crimes and wreaking havoc across city streets. And he never said the word black. But it was pretty obvious who he was talking about, and he received criticism saying he was amplifying racist tropes. So racism today is very, very seldom actually people talking about black people directly, but they will use fancy language to get around it. So too, anti-Semitism today is not really manifested. What people saying, go back to Poland, dirty Jew. It does happen. For sure. And it certainly happened a lot more post-October 7th. But what's way more common is exactly what you were talking about. The Zionists have no space should not have a space on campus. The Zionists control the discourse in our classrooms. The Zionists only care about kicking people out of their homeland, So of course, Zionism is simply a code for Jew. And by the way, 90% of American Jewry identifies with the Zionist cause. So even if your intent is not to be anti-Semitic, in effect, you are excluding 90% of American Jews from any space where you don't allow Zionists.
Yeah, I mean, I've long argued that anti-Zionism actually in practice and form is anti-Semitism because it is the only doorstop against a history of annihilation and a diaspora that's always been persecuted. I just don't see that. And it was founded for that. I mean, that doesn't, again, if the protests, and I know you probably would agree with this, had from the get-go literally been, we support a secure Israel, we don't like Bibi, or we don't, I think I would feel, obviously, we would feel a lot less threatened. I still think the problem is radical Islamic terrorism, but okay, you can have great differences with a Likud government if that's what you choose. People in Israel have a great difference with them and are protesting about the judiciary problems over there, the overreach. But it was never that. As of October 8th, the DSA was marching for Hamas. And really, most of the marches I've seen, and this brings me to the encampment question specifically, none of them are saying free the hostages or condemning Hamas, are they? Is anybody doing that? Again, I haven't really gone down there and done the interviews, but it's not like people are saying, hey, free the hostages or free the women, or there was none of it. It's all, this cause is evil, and that's why we're camped out, right?
Absolutely. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I've not seen any nuance or any real interest in dialogue or negotiation. It's just Israel is committing a genocide, which, by the way, they said Israel was committing a genocide before October 7th. I mean, I could send you the screenshots from all these campus groups talking about Israel committing a genocide like 3 years ago. And it's all about we give glory to the martyrs. And this is a settler colonial regime. So there's no real interest in having any sort of political or intellectual nuance. I'll also just go back to a point you made earlier. I think I can add somewhat of an interesting religious dimension to the anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism debate, which is I, as a religious Jew, pray 3 times a day. And every time I pray, I have to know which direction east is. Why? Because I pray facing Jerusalem. I and Jews have been doing that for 2,000-3,000 years now. When I make the blessings after I eat food, I talk about the return to Zion, and I talk about our goals to bring Jews from all corners of the land back to our ancestral homeland. So you could call it Zionism, you could call it decolonialism, whatever you want to call it, but Jews living in the land of Israel has been a central tenet of our faith for literally thousands of years. So when you have professors or students who know absolutely nothing and they reject the notion of a connection between Jews and the land of Israel, of course that's anti-Semitic, because that is negating and denying a core tenet of my religious identity.
Oh, of course. I mean, it is absolutely, without question and qualification, the ancestral indigenous home to the Jews. I mean, it just is. And even if you're not religious, that's true. But being religious, I think, adds an important layer to it. these students that you speak to, because I'm very fascinated by the ahistorical nature of it, the ignorance, some of it willful, some of it not. Do they know that like Islam didn't come around even till the 7th century? I mean, this is important. Do they know that it was the Romans who invented Syria, Palestina to erase Jewish life after the Second Temple? I mean, do they know any of this? Which is, by the way, a Google search can tell you. You don't have to be a Judaica scholar or a historian of any kind. Do they know anything about this historiography or anything?
I think there are basic histories that are either not being taught or being deliberately ignored. Because really, to answer your question, I unfortunately have to say no. And I want to be nuanced, and I want to give a fair characterization of this process.
Listen, I want you to come on here and just tell it like it is. I mean, again, they're not. Unfortunately, there is such a lack of nuance, which is why this is so sickening, right? I mean, that's
I wish I could tell you that they're even interested in a debate, and I'll give you one anecdote. There's a producer for a major network program, and he was in touch with me shortly after October 7th, saying that he wanted to model to the rest of the country what a productive debate and disagreeing better would look like. So he said, I want you representing the state of Israel to present your opinions. And then I want a student at Harvard who is a leader in the pro-Palestine encampment to represent his narrative. And you'll have a public debate. It'll be televised. And you'll end by shaking each other's hand and saying that we may disagree, but we can all get along. Now, he approached me with this idea in the middle of October. To this day, we're now in May 22nd, I have not been able to find a leader of the pro-Palestinian caucus at Harvard who is willing to, on TV, engage in a respectful, nuanced debate. And there are two answers for that when I ask them, or two responses, I should say. The first type of response is to simply ignore me. And the second type of response, which I would argue is far more dangerous, is to say, I have no problem debating in general, but I can't normalize or grant legitimacy to your narrative. I can't equivocate our position to your position, and therefore I'm not going to be able to debate you. And that is incredibly scary and a damning indictment on the state of higher education, where at some of the most or supposed elite universities, you have students who are not willing to engage in ideas that they don't like. They're not willing to put themselves beyond their uncomfortable intellectual limits. And a university is designed inherently to foster those types of conversations, but so many students are just not willing to do it. And let me close by saying, I'm happy to be proven wrong. I am happy to get an angry text after this saying, my name is so-and-so, and I'd love to do this, and I'd love to expose you and all your lies. Great, let's do it. But as of now, it's been 6-7 months. I haven't been able to find one single person.
I mean, I have such an issue with their semantical argument, even, which I think is just so hollow and superficial and ridiculous. I'm willing to debate in general, but I'm not willing to debate on the terms that I think are normalized. No, if you're having a debate and there's two people, it's not one party doesn't get to decide what's normalized and not. That's what the debate's about. So that's just a lot of garbage. I mean, that's the kind of, bullshit gymnastics intellectually that people talk about at elite institutions. I went to them where they just talk in code and jargon, and it makes absolutely no sense. If you break it down, if you really start reading it, you read some of that academic language, which I know you're doing, and I did. It's a lot of it's just meaningless. I mean, you know what I mean? It's a lot of words. It's great. It's full of footnotes, and it's a lot of BS. I unfortunately had to endure it, in my opinion.
My congressman and a friend, Congressman Richie Torres of New York, he once
one of the rare progressive voices.
Yes, one of the very rare progressive voices. Absolute mensch, great guy. He made this excellent point. He said, if you were to ask the average American on the street, do you condemn Hamas? Yeah, of course. Do you condemn the kidnapping of babies? Yeah, of course. If you were to ask an academic, do you condemn Hamas? Well, you have to understand, you have to go back 75 years of settler colonialism, and there's nuance to it. At the end of the day, if institutions of higher learning are meant to be value-driven or morally driven, which commencement is tomorrow, that's what some of the speakers are going to be talking about, how these are institutions of truth, there is not a whole lot of morality or ethics or even truth that is being exposed in these universities, and it's a real shame. I know we're being recorded, so we could stop this. I need to get a laptop charger.
Go ahead.
My battery's
Go ahead. Yeah. Go right ahead. Go ahead. You got it.
Sorry, I need to find an outlet. Give me 1 second.
Sure. We'll take care of it.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that.
No problem. We are not live, so even though we record this, we're live. No problem. Even if we were live TV is what it is. I want to switch for a second over to the politics. Okay, so at this podcast, we're nonpartisan. I was raised a Democrat. I'm not one anymore. Not only because of Israel, but a lot of the reasons have been this sort of what I think been this gradual drifting away from what I think has been an important bedrock alliance in the United States and Zionism and all that. We're here, analyzing this, looking at it an election year.
Yeah.
Are you at all concerned about the general? I'm not talking about where the Democratic Party is today. I'm not suggesting that everybody in it anyway is abandoning Israel, but you do see that Biden's coalition is very divided on whether the Republicans are not, and I'll tell you about that in a second, which I think a lot of people misunderstand. They immediately attribute it to the wrong things. What are you feeling about the politics? Aren't you concerned, as I am, about the Biden administration and what the second term would be? And again, we're going to get into Trump. Everyone doesn't have to go right to Trump. I always say to people, we're not going to both sides it. Let's have a real conversation. So not censoring you. I'm just, people always go, Trump is, okay. So how are you feeling about the state of Biden, Democrats, and the left,
I'm extremely concerned about not only the state of Biden, but the state, as you said, of the Democrats. We just said earlier that Richie Torres is a rare progressive voice who's also sensible when it comes to foreign policy. Why is that the case? Why is it that we can count like two people, John Fetterman and Richie Torres? That's really bad. I'm happy to compare my progressive credentials any day of the week. I'm the only Orthodox Jew I know who voted for Bernie Sanders twice. I marched for Black Lives Matter. I marched for the LGBT community. I marched when Roe v. Wade was overturned. I did my duty. I registered as a Democrat on my 18th birthday. So I can confidently tell you that the Democratic Party that I know, or I knew when I was 18 to now when I'm 24, which is not a very long period of time, has so radically changed. And I remember being a student delegate to the 2016 Democratic Convention, where, again, we nominated someone who I didn't like. I didn't like Clinton. I preferred Bernie. And I remember waving an Israeli flag and being called a terrorist sympathizer. That, to me, was sort of my wake-up call. And I admitted that, yes, there are these elements that are anti-Israel and possibly anti-Semitic, but they are all the way on the fringes. They're all the way to the left, and they don't really have much political persuasion. However, as post-October 7th political realities have made it out, it is clear that far left fringe radical base is a lot more persuasive and a lot more impactful on policy than we believe to be true. And the best example is Biden's approach to Israel, his entire approach to Israel since October 7th. It is so obvious, so blatant that he's doing it because he cannot afford to lose the however many electoral points that Michigan offers. The fact that he can honestly say, on one hand, that we support the Jewish people and I'm a Zionist, you don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist.
It's ironclad. He says, always says it's ironclad. Right.
He gave a speech, he gave a speech on Holocaust Remembrance Day, Yom HaShoah. And then the very next day, he said that he is going to pause necessary arms shipments to Israel because he objected to them going into Rafah and trying to free the hostages and dismantle Hamas. And not only that, but it turns out, I think it was Politico that reported this, the reason he did it then is because he didn't want that policy decision to overcloud or to overshadow his speech on Holocaust Remembrance Day. So I'm deeply concerned about his advisors, his policy, where he's getting his information from. At the same time, I'm not ready to abandon the Democratic Party. I think the Democratic Party kind of abandoned me, but I'm certainly not ready to jump ship and bat for the red team, so to say. So I'm what people would probably call politically homeless. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah, which is what I am. So, but that's interesting. Bernie Sanders always been very left, which I guess comported with your basic progressive worldview, but he's always been, I'd say, wobbly at best and pretty awful at most in Israel. I mean, he's very quick to criticize it, which comes again from a historical left wing, the days of the Cold War, the Soviet Union, the Arabs, the PLO. It does, and resistance since the 67 war, long before Hamas, obviously. So how did you reconcile your support for Bernie with that? Did you think that Bernie ultimately would be a stopgap against the worst elements?
Yeah, it wasn't even a question of reconciliation, because I just honestly didn't think that it would be that critical or important. As in, I agree with him on universal health care, and I agree with him with free college tuition. I mean, that I actually don't agree with him on anymore now that I've actually gone to college. And I agree with him on the need to revamp our military-industrial complex. And there are certain foreign policy decisions I disagree with him on, Israel included. Fine, not a big deal. I'm a young person, so October 7th was a wake-up call in terms of the existential crisis in which the state of Israel found herself in. I didn't experience the first or second Intifada. I, of course, didn't experience the Six-Day War, the Lebanon War, or the Second Lebanon War. I just didn't. To me, the state of Israel is a place where it's safe, it's secure, and it's on the map, and that's sort of it. But October 7th was a wake-up call of no, those core tenets, not just of our religious identity, but of our political calculations, are very much being called into question. And that's when I said, okay, this actually really matters to me as a top three issue in a way that it just really never did before. And I know that there are tons of people who had that political awakening as well post October 7th, not just because the state of Israel became way more important to us, but also because we realized, how I said earlier, that there was this really naked and dangerous anti-Semitism on the left.
Yeah, I mean, Trump is manifestly unfit for office. He is a complete menace in so many ways. I've never supported him. I'm a never Trumper. I'm in that movement for wherever we are all politically homeless. Although I've got all sorts of economic and foreign policy disagreements with the Democratic Party, which makes me homeless. And I think the direction of the Biden administration on so many of these economic and domestic issues, as they're called, have been very disastrous, and they will continue to be. I think I don't believe Joe Biden should have ever considered himself Franklin Roosevelt in the wake of a pandemic, passing one big spending bill after the other. It's not only partially why we're here, but I digress. I am very concerned about this dynamic, and I propose this to you, and it's something we'd have to continue to talk about, is that when you see neo-Nazis, long associated with the right, thugs, goons, scumbags, whatever, even Charlottesville, but even these guys on the expressway in Florida or whatever like that, it's horrible, to a Jew that's, hit you hard. But they have no real power, and they just don't. They're considered creeps, by the vast majority of people, They're not running the Republican Party. That's a lot of bullshit. That's not what's happening. But there is a insidious, to use an earlier word, and I think fomenting institutional anti-Semitism in left-wing institutions, academia being prime among them, but education, in the world of entertainment, in the world of corporations, a lot of that stuff through DEI and just the white guilt landscape, to use a word, has kind of created this too, that I think is very worrisome, because you can get, was talking of normalized discussions which go, but Israel's committing genocide. I mean, I'm not anti-Semitic, but Israel shouldn't exist because they're brown people. All that stuff seeps in, which I think has greater currency. So I wrestle with, not because I have any plans to vote for Trump, but almost to a T, the Republican Party is pro-Israel. Some reasons it's strategic, others it's evangelical, and it's biblical. So what? I mean, you know what I mean? When Israel's in an existential crisis, you and I can have creedal differences that we're both Jews on what we think the book of Revelations means. I don't care. I mean, I care that Israel's secure, and I care that there are people of different faiths too who want that. So I guess I always wrestle with that. I throw that out to you. I'm not suggesting that you suddenly become a Republican, because I'm not a Republican. I just think it's worth thinking about, because I think the October 7th wake-up call was in the works, which is why I left the party when I saw people like AOC and Ellen Omar not being condemned for voting against the Iron Dome. Things that were marginal, but now you couldn't even get a majority of the Democratic caucus to condemn Rashida Tlaib, who is a vituperative anti-Semite. It is not even in debate. You can talk to Muslims, ex-Muslim scholars who know of her or know what she comes from and know that's just who she is. And that party, yeah, democracy, they voted for in Dearborn, but they haven't condemned her, really, right? Hey, I love that the Republicans are forced to say to someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene or someone else, hey, we're not putting you on a committee. Or when someone has a white nationalist affiliation, they're called out. Why aren't the Democrats held to the same standard? Rashida Tlaib is just as bad. She has a youth vote. She has an Instagram following. She has a white progressive following. It's not like, this isn't even ethnically divided. So, I worry about that stuff. I just throw it out there to pose to you.
I think it's a great point. Let me start off by saying, as I think I mentioned, Richie Torres is my congressman, and he's a Democrat.
Yes.
And I will continue to vote for him for as long as he's running, as long as I'm his constituent, he has my vote forever. At the same time, he is in the same party as someone like Rashida Tlaib.
Which is good because you need people who are not like her, of course.
Right. Yes, right. Exactly. Right. So there are elements within the Democratic Party that need reformation, certainly, but there are also elements in the Democratic Party that we do a disservice by not amplifying. It's a mixed bag. It's a Big Tent party. And I think, as is natural with any political party after 3-4 administrations, they go through some type of ideological evolution. And the Democratic Party is in the midst of that evolution right now as it pertains to Israel. I would add, though, that I've testified in front of Congress twice now, in front of the Judiciary Committee and Education Committee. And then I've met privately with the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee and with different members of different committees. And it's always been...
Who's the House Ways and Means?
That's Congressman Jason Smith,
right,
who is, I think, from Missouri.
Right, that sounds right.
Missouri or Ohio? I actually don't know. Hopefully he doesn't hear me say that. It's always been bipartisan. Now, the Democrats, as Richie Torres would say, do they feel it in their kishkas? Do they really mean it? Okay, that's it. Probably not.
No.
I will say, and I hope he does hear this.
Did he use the word kishkas? Did he actually say
that? Yeah, he knows Yiddish more than I know Yiddish.
Yeah.
Who I will call out is someone like Jerry Nadler, by the way, who when I was testifying in front of the House Judiciary Committee, literally fell asleep. But anyways, the Democrats.
I'm not saying it just because I like you. You're very compelling. I mean, there have been some snoozy testimonies before Congress. If you ever watch C-SPAN, you'd be asleep.
No.
Right.
Even if I was boring, he fell asleep in the first 10 minutes. Right after his opening statement, he passed out. But anyways, point being, even though he's a bad exception, Democrats and Republicans care about this issue. Yeah. When it comes to anti-Semitism, for the most part, they care about the issue. The Education Committee, which is really the forefront leading this endeavor, they care about combating anti-Semitism in academia and in K through 12 and on college campuses. They really do. The committee is strictly bipartisan, and they really do mean it. However, I do recognize, in the same way I recognize as a 17-year-old student delegate at the DNC, that, there are these voices. Unfortunately, they have been growing, both in numbers and in dollar amounts, but voices nonetheless who call for this equivocation that you can't condemn anti-Semitism, we also have to condemn Islamophobia, that we shouldn't be sending arms to Israel. And we need to root that out. But the answer is not abandoning the Democratic Party, because there is nothing more that Rashida Tlaib would love than for us to just call it quits.
Oh, yeah, right. And you listen, the truth be told, I wish that I've said this long before October 7th or anything related to Israel. I've long wanted the Republican Party and the Democratic Party both to have a more equal proportion of Jewish voters, because it makes a bipartisan consensus on Jewish issues stronger. And by the way, that goes for any group. I completely understand historically. My family were Democrat. I understand why Black people were once the party of Lincoln, and now they don't vote. They vote less, considerably less. Who knows about this year? For considerably less for Republicans, but I think it would be in the interest of any community for both parties to serve them. I think it's very poor that the Democrats or that the Black community only relies on the Democrats. I do. I think that doesn't serve them, and I wish that the Republicans really had to fight for that vote. And any group that's had to fight deserves that. And so for the November vote, you're going to go Biden, right? Because it's a binary choice. Are you going to vote Bobby Kennedy?
It's funny you mentioned about.
Are you going to write somebody in, or what are you going to do?
No. I'm not going to write someone in. It's funny you say Bobby Kennedy because I had a conversation with him when he came to Harvard, and I asked him a question on Israel, and he gave this magnificent 15-minute answer that I was shocked by.
Well, his dad was killed over his support for Israel by Sirhan Sirhan. I mean, I don't know how often he says that, but yes, Palestine. I mean, that was a major event. People always say, "What did he get done?" I mean, in the history books, sometimes they don't bury it, but they're like, "Oh, Bobby Kennedy's advocacy for Israel aroused the anger of a Palestinian activist named Sirhan Sirhan." Yeah, I mean, and I'm not necessarily a Kennedy supporter, but that's interesting. He gave a magnificent answer, huh?
Oh my God, it was incredible. And it was passionate and it was authentic. Having said that, I mean, there are just too many issues I disagree with him on. I'm not going to vote for him. And Trump, it's hard because...
Isn't Trump more pro-Israel when it comes down to it?
Exactly. Of course, Trump is more pro-Israel. And of course, it would be better for the Jewish community, more broadly speaking, to have someone like Trump in office. And I, by the way, know tons of people who would be working in the White House should he get reelected.
Well, don't you think that there will be a larger percentage of the Jewish vote this year? I do for Trump.
Oh, that goes without saying.
Yeah.
However,
that doesn't mean you have to be in the group.
Yeah. I mean, also, look,
everything else is horrible,
Yeah, look, also, I'm voting in New York, so it's not like my vote is that consequential.
No, and actually, it's more of we're just having a spitball conversation.
Yeah, but
we're not ideological. We're not going to be like, "How dare you?" I mean,
right. But just talking in theory, I'd probably vote for Biden because I just couldn't do it to myself.
Biden, my issue with Biden is one of disappointment. Put aside the domestic stuff, I did vote for him. And as I said, I've never voted for Trump. It's partially because he is too old for the job. So is Trump. I get it. Okay. But I think that Biden, who absolutely spent his career as a champion of Israel, I mean, he's always had Zionism and Israel as kishkas. I mean, my parents went to hear him at the Jewish Federation of Miami in 1986. I remember talking about him. No, I mean, he's just one of those guys that always cared deeply about this issue. I think a combination of the changing nature and realignment of the Democratic Party and Biden's age and who he surrounded himself with, because that's where the tide has gone, have been bad. And I don't think he's senile, but I think he's lost some of the ability to have the stamina to not be as consistent. I don't think it comes from a bad place or a worrisome place, but I do worry a second term will be full of these Hamasniks, and again, I can't vote for Trump, so I don't know what to do. I asked you because I thought talking it through would be therapy for both of us.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about being politically homeless. There are a lot of Jews who proudly identified with the progressive cause and proudly identified as Democrats or liberals. And we're going to be faced with a really difficult dilemma in November because we've been really, as you said, pretty eloquently, we've been really disappointed. And at the same time, I can't see myself voting for someone who's as morally reprehensible as Donald Trump. And I think as dangerous to our democratic institutions as Donald Trump. At the same time, I know that the state of Israel will be a lot better off and the Jewish community will be a lot better off if we did have someone like Donald Trump.
Amen on that. I wanted to end with you. I have never been a religious Jew, but I feel so much more reconnected to my Judaism through this. And, I only have fond memories. I don't have any trauma growing up Jewish or anything. It was just so secular. And also my experience, American experience with secular Jews is this was the best place to be a Jew other than Israel, the safest place, a Christian country, a Christian Protestant country that protected us, unlike all the other countries. And I have a deep connection to having gone to a Presbyterian prep school, to just their connection to the Judeo-Christian heritage. So I've really turned to some of the Bible for support during this. And so one of my favorite quotes I wanted to end with, we talk of God's protection in Israel, Deuteronomy 33:29. Blessed are you, Israel, who is like you, a people saved by the Lord. He is your shield and helper and your glorious sword. Your enemies will cower before you and you will tread on their heights. As my Christian friends say, we're the apple of God's eye, so don't worry about it. Makes me sleep at night, right? What else can I say? I know, the Bible being the Bible. I never thought I would do that, but you've inspired me. But your passion and your dedication and all you stand for, I think you're one of the most promising people. Do you want to be in politics?
Absolutely. I want to.
Oh, I love it. All right. By that point, you'll be a Republican. I'll vote for you.
We'll see.
Shabbos Kestenbaum. Yes, thank you for joining us. Where can tell every listeners where they can find you on the socials so everybody can follow you?
Yeah. My Twitter, my X is Shabbos K, ShabbosK. My Instagram is Shabbos Kest, which is the first 4 letters of my last name, Kestenbaum. So I'm pretty active on both those sites, and would love to see you on the social media space.
Guys, make sure you follow him. You'll come back and talk to us soon. We'll have an ongoing conversation about this. Hopefully, things will lighten up. But you know what? It's still something I want to engage with. It's important to me as a Jew, an American, Zionist, and the like. Shabbos Kestenbaum, folks. Thank you for listening to everybody. Stay dirty, stay moderate, and stay safe.